All right, hello and welcome. This is another edition, maybe the first, I think the first edition of the Global Antitrust Institute's discussion series. This one is with two bald dudes with beards who like to argue about antitrust. Each of the GAI episodes is going to feature practitioners in the antitrust world, economists, lawyers, and talking about the latest topics in antitrust. Sometimes they'll have divergent views, sometimes similar. Sometimes maybe we'll change some minds, who knows. So my name is Jan Rybnicek. I'm an attorney at in the Washington, D.C. office of the law firm Freshfields Bruckhaus Deringer, where I practice antitrust law. I'm an adjunct professor at the Scalia Law School at George Mason, and I am a senior fellow at the Global Antitrust Institute. I am joined today by Hal Singer, who is an economist who specializes in antitrust, a prolific tweeter. I should put that up at the very top. Hal, you work on all sorts of antitrust litigation, some pretty high profile cases, interesting cases, UFC's monopsony case, I think, foreign exchange antitrust litigation, some of the no-poach cases, I think, for Jimmy John's. So you've been pretty active in that space and all throughout antitrust litigation. You received AAI's Enforcer Award, I think, in 2018 for your litigation work in the pharma space, right?
Yeah.
And most importantly, I think, you are the assistant coach of the Destroyers, which are, I think, back-to-back champions in the local youth basketball league. Is that right?
That's right. Chantilly Youth Association. We should just talk about that for the entire blog. Is that okay?
There you go. Well, make it a three-peat and we'll come back and talk about it.
I put that in my Twitter bio. I felt like that is one of life's, biggest accomplishments. At least it's got to make at least the top three.
It's certainly interesting. Well, don't stop. I think you can make your way up to head coach someday.
Maybe so.
So as you can tell, we're doing this from our homes under the current circumstances. I've got some lovely kids art. Hal, you've got less kids art, but I see it looks like some sort of caricature picture. I don't know if that's Philip Zimbardo or who that is, but
it's a mobster. Hold on, I'll bring that over. This is like show and tell. We can make this part. We should every day. We should every blog. We should do like one piece of art or something in the background. But today we can look at this caricature. What is caricature? It's my face at the palm. See that? And
so
this is back when I had hair. It was probably, I don't know, in my 30s someday. But if you go to the Palm on 19th Street, you'll see me there.
So this is like last year. Yeah. But I just want to know, it does look like you're wearing your pajamas still.
Of course I'm wearing pajamas. I haven't changed out of pajamas since the Corona break started.
Yeah, well.
I trust you're wearing pajamas too, right?
I'm not.
You're not?
I'm not.
I hope you didn't get dressed up for this.
Oh,
I did want to notice because we're going with two bald guys with beards. I do want to note that the beard looks very nice today. I like the gray tones that are coming on the side.
I appreciate that. I trimmed it for you. I hadn't.
You don't have any coming down. None of it comes out of here though.
The gray, no.
We're almost complementary in that sense.
Complimentary.
But the hair, you didn't take the hair all the way down. I want you on the next blog. I want it to come all the way down. I know you're probably busy with the kids and stuff.
You
gotta keep it tight.
Okay. Well, before we lose any more viewers, let's get on with the show. So what we're talking about today is the AmEx decision, the Supreme Court's AmEx decision, and its implications, and most recently and most relevantly, I think, the Sabre Farelogix decision, which came out in early May or early April. Maybe just to start, I'll give a little refresher on AmEx for those who aren't familiar with it, but also given its reception in the antitrust community, some people may have blocked it out of their minds. So So we'll do a little refresher, and how can fill in the spaces that he thinks I have met, and
Okay.
I'm sure he'll have many views. But the AmEx is a case that is about American Express's anti-steering provision and whether or not that provision violates the antitrust laws. At the heart of that case is really how we define a market. And whether we treat two-sided markets differently than one-sided markets. Market definition, I think, is, I think most people would agree that market definition has been at the core of antitrust for a long time. So it's not something that is new or surprising to be at the core of a case, but here it really did take center stage. The credit card industry, I think most would agree, it could be described as a two-sided market. And what that means is that it has two sets of consumers. On the one side, you've got merchants who decide to accept a credit card in order to attract customers who then use that credit card and spend money at their store. And on the other side, you have consumers who find it to be an easy form of payment, and they get various perks, frequent flyer miles, hotel points, other things, cash back. So merchants are attracted to credit cards based on the desire to attract customers, and in exchange for accepting a credit card, they pay what is called a service fee or a swipe fee, right? They pay that to the credit card company for, on a percentage basis of the transaction. And on the other hand, customers are attracted because of the perks and the easy form of payment. So the credit card industry is made up of four players principally. So you've got AmEx, you've got Visa, MasterCard, and Discover. AmEx had has a bit of a different business model than the others. It charges a higher swipe fee to these merchants in order to fund better perks and benefits to customers or to the users of the credit card. In order to do that, it also has this anti-steering provision, which prevents merchants from, at the point of sale, once a customer comes up to the cash register, it prevents the merchants from saying, hey, it'd be better if you use Visa, or it'd be better if you use MasterCard. And you can understand why that would be important for American Express. But that's the provision and the restraint that's at the heart of this case.
Evil.
And so the plaintiffs in AmEx alleged that this anti-steering provision ultimately resulted in higher prices, higher swipe fees. And the tricky question, again, was how do you assess whether or not there's harm to competition? Is it sufficient to say, look, there are higher swipe fees, and that's all you need to show, and that's it? Or do you need to really look at not only the merchant side, but also the customer side? So in a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court held that for two-sided transaction markets, such as credit cards, the plaintiff has to show harm in the market overall, so across both sides. So, and that there's harm to the overall competitive process, and that showing harm on one side or the other is insufficient. Justice Thomas wrote the opinion for the majority, and really at the heart of his opinion is that this recognition that multi-sided markets bring two different groups of people together, and that they have interdependent a relationship, right? The more card users you have, the better it's going to be for the merchants. The more merchants that take a card, the better it's going to be for the cardholders. And so Justice Thomas, I think maybe the best quote that sums it up is, in his opinion, he wrote, "Credit card networks are best understood as supplying only one product, the transaction, that is jointly consumed by cardholders and a merchant. Accordingly, the two-sided market for credit card transactions should be analyzed as a whole." So I think that gives us enough to get into it. How obviously there's a dissent written by Justice Breyer, and we can talk more about that as well. But I know that you had some strong reactions to the case, and so I think we should just jump into it now that we've set the table.
Yeah. So there's at least three new requirements that appear to fall on plaintiffs that come out of the AmEx decision. And we don't know we're not sure about these because it's the way that it's written. We're also not sure the scope in the sense of whether it would apply only in cases involving vertical restrictions and two-sided transaction platforms. Because now we have a case, we're going to talk about it, that clearly was outside of that. It was a horizontal merger, and it appears to have applied there as well. But let's just, everything that I'm about to say is premised on the notion that it would only apply for vertical conduct involving two-sided transaction platforms. But it appears that plaintiffs have three new requirements that are fundamentally different from the way that antitrust used to operate, right? But we used to be able to show market power directly. That is by showing with direct evidence that a defendant was able to raise prices over competitive levels or to exclude rivals or restrict output. And AmEx, the majority says, no, direct proof of market power is out. Now you need to define a market and go back the old-fashioned way and show market power indirectly. You know, that the defendant has a large share of some well-defined market with entry barriers. And you need to account for interconnected pricing at this market definition stage, which is a critical new requirement. That's the first requirement that comes out. The second requirement is also ambiguous because of the way this was phrased, is that now you need to show an output effect. An output effect is paramount. And you know, I did a blog with this, or I did a chat with this, and Randy Picker pointed out that even though they did fixate on output effects, both in the decision and in the oral arguments, in the language of the decision, they used an or, which suggests that you still might be able to show anti-competitive effects other ways. But anyway, the reason why we think that output effects may be a requirement is that the plaintiffs had already shown price effects, not only on the merchant side of the market, that is, they connected the restrictions to higher merchant fees, but plaintiffs also showed a net harm on the cardholder side. That is, even netting out any benefits from these rewards, that cardholders were paying higher prices because the merchants were passing through these inflated merchant fees into the final price of the goods. And so it seems like the only way the majority could get out of that box was to say, you know what, price effects aren't sufficient. We now need you to do output effects as well. And the way that they insist on output effects, I was very confused because they got very excited about the fact that the market was expanding. You know, the number of credit card transactions were growing over time, and they said, aha, this can't be anti-competitive. If it were, you know, transactions should be falling. But of course, that's not the right counterfactual. What you want to know is to what extent would the transaction have grown in the absence of the restriction? But we'll leave that for another block. And then finally, you mentioned it before, you now need to consider these offsetting benefits. But again, it's very ambiguous as to what that both sides requirement means. Does it literally mean that you have to show a harm to both sides of the market? Because I'm going to argue that would almost never be satisfied, right? If I have a scheme to inflate prices on one side and I use it to subsidize the other, when you take away the scheme, it's always going to hurt. It's always that subsidy is going to go away from the other side of the market. So it can't be, at least I hope it's not, a both sides requirement. I think more likely it's that you at least have to show a harm on net. But if that were the case, then why wasn't the majority satisfied with the showing that the plaintiffs made at the district court? So anyway, those are the three new requirements, again, cabined in these vertical transactions involving two-sided vertical restrictions and two-sided transaction platforms. Go ahead, Jan.
Sure, no, and I think those are some. I think those are certainly the most interesting parts of the decision. I mean, I think first on the direct evidence point, you know, I think your claim that this is controversial and novel is a bit overstated. I mean, Justice Thomas dealt with this in a footnote, and I mean, I think his explanation is, listen, there are cases in which we've not required plaintiffs to precisely, I think he uses the adjective precisely, define a relevant market. And those are cases in which we have horizontal agreements that are kind of inherently suspect and of the type almost, you know, the next step away from collusion. And those, we have a better sense that those are more likely to be harmful than not. And we've got this quick look analysis, and this all came from Indiana Federation of Dentists, right? Where you had a group of dentists who were essentially boycotting x-rays to insurers. And the court said, and the showing was that, there were no X-ray services where the federation was. And so the court rightfully said, listen, this seems like a conspiracy of the garden variety type, but I get that it's a trade association, so there might be some benefits. We don't need to go the full mile and show the relevant market. Precisely. You still have to know the relevant market to understand if there's an anti-competitive effect. It's impossible, I think, to understand if there's anti-competitive harm without some context, right? I mean, a price effect has to be put into some context. And if you say this is the price effect, well, if it's not related to the relevant market, it's not going to matter to you at all, right? So you have to have some context in every case. You're going to have to understand the relevant market. And I think here, and I think you correctly point out that these are vertical restraints. So it's a full-blown rule of reason analysis, and in full-blown rule of reason world, you got to show a market.
You got to show market. You're telling me that you wouldn't be able to show in a vertical restriction case market power in the absence of defining market? You couldn't do it with direct evidence?
I think that's the way the court interpreted the precedent. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, I think the direct evidence showing is can be useful in the court's view, where you have horizontal agreements that are kind of the suspect class, right? And there's less, and this all, I think, goes to kind of the risk of error and the risk of potentially preventing something that is pro-competitive, which I think a lot of people view vertical restraints tending to be more likely to be pro-competitive.
Okay. Well, I would just commend everyone to read Louis Kaplow's piece on why ever define markets in the Harvard Law Review. And as a practitioner, I like to do it both ways, but I almost always start with direct evidence.
Yeah, and no, I think that's a good point. I mean, I think, and this is how investigations happen all the time. I mean, you look at the evidence and you can do the effects analysis, and that can kind of back you into the market definition, but you got to get to the market definition at some point, whether it's first or second.
All right. Well, let's let this one go. We might have to agree to disagree there as to how informative defining markets are, because remember what we're doing there is it's an indirect way of making an inference as to whether someone has pricing power. And if you can see it directly, it begs the question, why are we going through this exercise? But let's table that and move on to the...
Table that and move on to, I think your other point was output effects, right?
Yeah.
Which I think, it is certainly something that is new and interesting about this case. I mean, I think the way I understand it is, in traditional single-sided markets analysis, a price increase would typically get you home, right? Because it would imply an output reduction. Here, I think the reason to look at output is because there is no unified price. I think price, as you said, price is included in the series with the or that you said. I think price is included in the series because I guess you could technically have some sort of unified consolidated price that nobody actually pays because there's no unified product. But I don't really see that being as practical. So output is a better metric of whether or not somebody is exerting market power, right? That's what you're going for.
You would agree with me that just kind of a naive, quick look to see whether transactions have gone up over the relevant period is not going to inform you about the direction or the derivative of the effect on output, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right, but I think you have to remember. I think you have to remember the posture of the case. It was the plaintiff's burden to show that output went down, and so if you have countervailing evidence that says, I know,
but I'm pretty sure in the opinion, in the majority of the opinion, they were trumpeting the fact that output was increasing. But in many industries, expanding industries, you can have output increasing. Look, demand curves slope down. They slope down in price, and if you can show a price effect, and you can marry that up with evidence that the demand curve slopes down, that should be sufficient to get you your output effect. In other words, but what likely happened here is that if merchants were passing through these inflated merchant fees into the end user prices, then so long as consumers' demand for those final products is downward sloping in price, then the number of transactions fell at the market. You can't see that in the data easily because it looks like transactions are going up, but economics is hard, which is I guess why we have to bring in experts.
People like you, right? This is going to be a great. This decision is great for your business, and you can maybe figure out and crack the code for how to prove this.
Maybe we should turn to the topical stuff now. That wonderful Sabre decision that could actually sink the AmEx decision.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know if I would go that far, but yeah, no, the Sabre decision. So this was Sabre has a proposed acquisition of Farelogix. Maybe just a couple words to set the stage, and then we can get into it. But on the Department of Justice Antitrust Division sued, I think back in August, to block this transaction between Sabre and Farelogix. In early April, Judge Stark in the District Court of District of Delaware issued his ruling saying that the DOJ hadn't proven its case. And just a background on the party, Sabre is a tech platform that provides global distribution services, GDS services, which essentially takes airline information, aggregates it, and sends it to travel agents, online travel agents, traditional brick and mortar travel agents, to help them better filter through the travel options and make sales to customers. I think 40% of all sales of airline travel are done through these GDSs, something like that. And Sabre is by far the largest. Its main competitors in GDS are Amadeus and Travelport. Farelogix is not, well, I should say one more thing about GDSs, which is it connects, this is implied from what I said, it connects the travel agents on one side and the airlines on the other. And you have similar indirect network effects as you do in the credit card industry there. Farelogix is one-sided. I think everybody agrees on that because it only connects to the airlines, right? It doesn't connect to the travel agents. And it sells a technology service that helps airlines kind of customize their packages for customers. And they have both kind of, Farelogix has a product that basically allows the bypass of a GDS system and would also allow to kind of be used with a GDS system to help airlines better package their sales. So there was a long trial, I think, earlier this year, lots of witnesses, lots of testimony, and the judge ultimately ruled, it took a bit of a belt and suspenders approach, which is found against the government on all sorts of grounds. But I think the most interesting for our purposes is that he relied on AmEx to find that only two-sided platforms compete with other two-sided transaction platforms. So I think that is one of the key takeaways for our purposes today. So maybe I'll leave it there and let you fill in some gaps and react.
Yeah. Oh, so yeah, the judge didn't appear to like the DOJ's economic expert either. That was interesting. Yeah. He did seem to like the defendant's expert. But yeah, so now what we have is it looks like we have a fourth requirement coming out of AmEx, right? As if the playing field were not uneven enough for plaintiffs. The 97% lose rate was not satisfactory, to the Chicago school folks. We needed to. I can't let you get up.
I can't let you get away with that. In mergers, you don't have a 97% lose rate. No. But as somebody who just beat the FTC in a merger litigation on the Avani Praxichem deal,
tell me what is the win rate for plaintiffs there? Do you know?
It is very low to beat. And once you've been sued by the federal government in a merger litigation, because of all the presumptions and all this stuff. So in merger litigation, I take your point on contract.
Right. So the 97% lose rate was for Section 2 cases, and we thought that AmEx was going to be contained or quarantined, for Section 2 for vertical restrictions used by two-sided transactions. But it turns out no. Now AmEx appears to have effects or impacts outside of single firm, vertical restriction cases, but instead in merger cases. And so now, like you said, the judge thinks that by AmEx, he is compelled to rule that Farelogix cannot be in the same relevant market, cannot be a competitor, because it only competes on one side of this two-sided platform. So now we have a fourth requirement, as if the world wasn't tough enough.
But I mean, and I think I would agree with what you're implying, which is that can't be true, right?
Yeah, this opinion, by the way, this is what's great on Twitter. I was looking, like Jonathan Baker went nuts, and Fiona Scott Morton went nuts, and of course I went nuts. I was having a hard time sleeping the first time it came out. I was upset, but then I saw that Josh Wright agreed with. I don't know if he agreed with the entirety, but he agreed with the central thrust, I think, of Baker. So if you got Baker and Josh Wright agreeing, right? I mean, that's a pretty large swath of consensus that this is not a good decision, right? But just to kind of tick through as to why it's not good, and I take this from. Well, Fiona mentioned this in a tweet, but I'd seen it earlier that night, which is that there was record evidence in this case that the GDSs combined, but including Sabre, engaged in exclusionary conduct to knock out Farelogix from becoming a two-sided competitor, which should be proof, right, that these guys were at least competitors in the same two-sided market at one point in time. If not today, at least they were in the past, and it kind of perversely rewarded Sabre for having engaged in this exclusionary conduct. And the point of her tweet was, look, if you knock out a two-sided rival and render them to be a one-sided competitor, you are then free to acquire them because they cannot be in the same relevant market as yourself, right?
Yeah,
the other thing that's nuts.
Let me just react to that quickly.
Try to defend that. Try to defend that decision.
Well, listen, I think we share the same view on kind of the judge's conclusion about two-sided platforms not competing with other two-sided, only competing with other two-sided platforms. But the potential competition issue, I mean, the potential competition doctrine's a bit complicated. I mean, I think traditionally when you have a party that has tried to enter and failed, that is actually pretty good evidence that they're not a potential competitor. They're not.
Well, what if the reason why they failed though is exclusionary conduct by the defendant?
I think that makes it interesting. I mean, if you think about the extreme case of if somebody went down and burned a plant, you burned your plant down, and you weren't able to enter because your plant was burned down. Yeah, I think I would discount your inability to enter because your rival burned your plant down, right?
Yeah.
Here, I do want to kind of bring people to reality, which is this is a 90-page opinion, and this discussion occurs over the course of like 3 paragraphs on 1 page. So it's not like the exclusionary conduct was thoroughly investigated. I wasn't at trial and I didn't read all the pleadings, so I don't know how.
Think about what this means too. Like it just occurred to me, or maybe I'm stealing it from someone else on Twitter. But in the Microsoft case, you had Microsoft was the platform, and it was competing against apps that were arguably just on one side or weren't a platform themselves. But you remember the whole theory of harm in the government's case, with that these middleware could one day evolve into becoming a rival platform, right? And so if you were to apply this logic back in Microsoft, like the conduct couldn't be anti-competitive because these guys don't compete in the same market, right? But of course, Microsoft anticipated these apps developing into a rival platform. Right.
No, I mean, I think
you would
do
a whole lot of damage with this.
Yeah, it would have been interesting here, and I don't know, maybe these documents exist, but if you had Farelogix with documents a year ago, 2 years ago, talking about how they wanted to become a two-sided platform, yeah, that's pretty good evidence. But the record evidence, I think, was this happened 10 years ago.
Right. Okay, fine. Anyway. But in any event, I think we might have an agreement here. We should seize this rare moment of agreement that the idea that AmEx somehow compels the judge to find these guys can't be competitors, right?
It could be the longest signature list on any brief submitted, right?
Now he did another thing too, and I called this out in a tweet on the night. This is what got me so upset, is that he interpreted the harm to both sides requirement as literally being a harm to both sides. That is, you've got to show that the restraint has caused a harm to in this case to the travel agents and to the firms that are shopping on the platform for service. And I think that that's going to be an impossible standard, because the travel agents are benefiting from this restriction. That is, the GDSs are imposing this restraint. And we didn't talk too much about what the restraint was, but I think the restraint is effectively another anti-steering or no surcharge. That is, the U.S. Airways couldn't tell someone who's trying to book a flight that if you go outside of the GDS, we'll be able to give you that fare at a lower price. The restrictions prevented them from doing that. And so Sabre was taking some of these overcharges that they were imposing on U.S. Airways and throwing it in the direction of the travel agent. So of course, if you knock this out, if you knock out the restrictions, the travel agents are going to appear to be harmed. You're going to take away a subsidy that they were getting by virtue of the restraint. So the judge's requirement, right, that you have to show that both sides were injured is going to be an impossible burden in any one of these situations where a platform is engaged in a restraint that allows it to impose super competitive prices on one side and then takes a portion of those overcharges and splashes them over to the other side as a subsidy, right? So
you're talking about the U.S. Airways Sabre case, not the Sabre Farelogix case.
No. I'm talking about the Sabre case, and I do want to get to the U.S. Airways case. I promise in a second, but just in the Sabre case, the judge has a finding that it's kind of a throwaway line. He says, even if I wasn't bound by this thing, he says, but they also failed to show harm to both sides, right? And so, that is harm to both sides from the merger, right? Harm to both sides from the merger, right? And I'm just telling you that we have one case here, and I want to move if we can to the U.S. Airways Sabre case, right, in a second. But just to wrap up with the U.S. v. Sabre merger case, right? We've got a clear episode where a judge, for one reason or another, gets twisted around on the meaning of AmEx and does something that is uneconomic, that is inefficient, right, and leads to a bad outcome. I think this merger, a consensus would be that this merger should be stopped. I'd like to argue. So that's the first case. That's kind of the first harm, if you will, from AmEx. But the opponents of AmEx, including myself, have been saying for a year now that just wait, we're going to have a parade of horrible decisions. And I do want to point you to another one, which is U.S. Airways Sabre case. All right, and now this one is a vertical restriction, and so in this one, and as I did mention, U.S. Airways is not allowed to steer customers away from Sabre by using pricing incentives, right? And they put this in front of a jury, and they actually argued it both ways. They argued a single one-sided market, and they argued a two-sided market. And the jury came back and found that Sabre's restriction was in violation of the antitrust laws. And they awarded damages to U.S. Airways. And it went up to the Second Circuit. And the Second Circuit said the damages estimate is flawed by AmEx because plaintiffs have to account for the removal of the subsidy. And what the Second Circuit said in particular, I'm paraphrasing, but go back and check me out on this, is that they literally have to deduct. It is the plaintiff's responsibility per AmEx to go back and to deduct the amount of the subsidy that's going to be taken away from the other side of the market, right, when the restriction is removed. And I want to suggest that is a second observation. I realize it's a small sample size, but just wait, right? We're going to have lots of them, okay? But this is the second case that was wrongly decided because of AmEx, and in particular, this ambiguity of whatever AmEx means about accounting for both sides. But let me just try this out on you and tell me if you agree or disagree with this proposition. But there's a two-sided platform is engaging in a restriction that harms me on one side. I'm a buyer on one side, but they're taking a portion of the overcharge and they're splashing it, to some third party. In this case, it was the travel agents, right? Mm-hmm. And I proved to a jury that it's anti-competitive, it's in violation of antitrust laws, right? And I can even estimate the extent to which I'm overpaying. Why should my damages be docked, right, by an ill-gotten gain from the other side that should never have occurred?
Let me ask it this way. Say we just use AmEx, right? So merchants fear that they are being overcharged. Right. Now, so the damage is going to be some recompense for that overcharge. But they did receive a benefit because those overcharges were then used, at least in part, maybe your argument is it's not all of it wasn't used, but at least in part were used to increase rewards, which attracted more customers, which attracted more card users that then went to your stores and spent more money and made you more revenue. So I think that's the idea of why you do need to look back at both sides. I mean, it goes back to the fundamental point about why we're looking at both sides in the first place, right?
Yeah, I'm open to looking at both sides, but what I think is wrong is to put a burden on the plaintiff to try to quantify what that ill-gotten subsidy was on the other side, and then deduct it. If the other side, if the defendants want to, and we'll get to this in a bit about how should we ultimately resolve this issue of offsets. But if the defendants want to bring up the offset, right? I think it's fine. But what's troublesome to me is this notion that it's the plaintiff's burden to make to estimate it, right, and then to deduct from their own damages, right, what that subsidy was. In your hypothetical here, it's very speculative that the rewards that Amex is creating, right, are generating more purchases for me. Let me just point out, I mean, as an Amex platinum holder, let me tell you, the rewards are like getting the free massages in the Centurion lounges, right? And it's the free Michelle Bernstein catered lunches at the Centurion lounges. I don't know if that's causing me to make more purchases with my Amex card that I wouldn't have otherwise made. But anyway, I don't know if we should beat this one to death.
I think it's a good point. I mean, listen, these. So I take your point about, especially the Farelogix, Sabre Farelogix case. It clearly seems like there's going to be an issue there. The DOJ has already signaled that it's going to appeal. I think it did it the day after the decision came out. The CMA in the UK issued a decision blocking the deal. So the deal, I don't think the deal is closed yet. Who knows by the time this posts, but there's still a question of whether or not the deal is going to be able to close. But in any event, you can see this appeal happening, and the Third Circuit's going to get a chance likely to take a crack at it. But, this is not an uncommon thing for the Supreme Court to make a decision, and then district courts struggle with how to implement it sometimes, and things get tested out, and there are bad decisions made and good decisions made. So I think, I don't think this means that we need to throw out Amex because all of us agree that there's something weird going on in that decision, which I think is somewhat telling.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that just on the Sabre decision alone that's the basis. I think that Amex, though, does represent a threat to the enforcement of the antitrust laws in a way that could never have been conceived or contemplated by those who gave us the law. And I think that, it's not, I've been saying it for about a year, but there's some important voices, much more important than me. American Antitrust Institute put out a brief this week, basically calling for the overturn of Amex. And the Antitrust Subcommittee put out comments, and they got just a ton of people weighing in, and many of whom called for the overturning of Amex. So I feel like this might actually happen, that I can see a bill in Congress soon. Saying that we should just wipe it out. And I just want to point out, that there are two paths here. There's about dealing with offsets, right? And one side of me, and I think this is kind of the progressive side, and boy, if I even suggest anything otherwise, I get in big trouble on Twitter. One side just says no offsets, right? And the idea is that Amex contradicts the way that we deal with offsets in any other aspect of antitrust. We have in price fixing cases, we'd never tell a bunch of conspiring firms that they get out of jail card because they splashed a portion of some overcharge on some other set of buyers, right? That wouldn't be recognized. And in merger cases, we're not supposed to, per Philadelphia National Bank, we're not supposed to be doing this balancing where we identify a harmed set of consumers and over there there's a set of consumers who might be winners, and then we're going to somehow engage in a balancing that would allow them. Philadelphia National Bank, as I understand it, would preclude that sort of balancing. And your buddy, Judge Bork, said that the only person who should be engaged in balancing is Congress. This should not be the domain of a court. And I actually agree with him there. And so there is an argument that says, why are we going to treat offsets differently here? Why is this night different from all other nights, and why should this antitrust decision be different from all other antitrust decisions? Just get rid of it, right? So that's one thing. Well, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, I mean, because of the two-sided nature of the platform, I mean, of these markets, right, and the interdependence, I think that is important. So if you look at kind of traditional one-sided markets, within the market, there are winners and losers, and we don't deal with those, right? In a merger, you could have a less efficient rival have to fall out. And there are some consumers that prefer that less efficient rival, but as a result of the merger, it becomes unsustainable and has to fall out. Even within the merged firm, sometimes product lines are cut for whatever reason, not because of for anti-competitive reasons, but even just for efficiency's sake. And there are some users that prefer those lines that are cut. And so there are winners and losers in the consumer set, but we don't go one by one and try to think about which consumers within that broader market, because we care about the competitive process within that market and whether or not there's harm to competition. And I think that's what Justice Thomas and the majority are trying to do genuinely in the AmEx decision, which is to try to look at the market as a whole and say, you know, what is going to show us that there's actually market power and harm to competition. Mind you, AmEx had a 25% share of the credit card industry. It's not something that jumps out at you as a firm with market power or monopoly power. And I'd also, you know, to your point, I think you made earlier, which is it would be impossible to show harm on both sides, right? Is it also true that it'd be impossible to never have harm on one side, right? You can, it may be very easy to show harm at least on one side. And if that's the case, doesn't a rule other than AmEx kind of just create a lower burden or an easier set of circumstances for the plaintiffs?
All right, well, so that puts us into compromise land, because I don't think AmEx solved the problem correctly. So AmEx says we're going to put it all on the plaintiff, and they've got to do it kind of in the very first phase of the inquiry, and they can't even get past, they can't even get to a presumption of harm until they deal with this interconnected, and they do it inside of market definition. So the compromise, and of course Breyer put this out, and it apparently was rejected, is that we will consider the offset. All right, but the burden would be on the defendants to show, to quantify it, to connect it to the conduct, and then to show that it swamps any of the harms that are occurring on the other side of the market. Right, that would be a reasonable and actually more traditional approach to efficiencies, which is we allow it to come in, but we just put the burden on the defendant. We don't do it until a later phase of the inquiry. So it is odd. I mean, it's curious to me that the majority couldn't even go there. So I think what we have is a very extreme wrong position. There's another extreme position, which is no offsets, which is going to come in this bill, I think, that reverses AmEx or seeks to reverse AmEx. And then there's this middle ground. But I don't even think that we can have the middle ground until AmEx is gone, right? So it's coming. I'm telling you, be prepared. It's coming. There's a bill, and AmEx is going to be challenged. And I think it might go. I think it should go. It's exciting times.
Famous last words. Beware, there's a bill coming. Well, I think on that, I think we can probably wrap it up. I think we've solved it all, right? Go write the bill, and we'll talk again when we have the legislation, right?
Until the next episode of Two Bald Guys with Beards.
Blathering about antitrust.
I like blathering. That's a better word. I'm glad you did that one. All right, we'll go to blathering. I realize it's a PG. This is a PG audience here of law schools.
Okay, kids art. But this has been fun, Hal. Always fun to talk to you about antitrust, and these issues are really fascinating. You know, this decision's not going away, and we're probably going to hear more about Sabre Farelogix even.
Sweet.
All right, man.
All right, see you on the next time. Get that hair a little tighter next time. Yeah, get it a little tighter.